In this video, I'm going to talk about how to name covalent compounds. Recall that covalent compounds form when electrons are being shared between atoms. So neither one of these atoms is strong enough to pull the electron away from the other atom, and so they're stuck sharing. Effectively, or technically, we would look at the electronegativity difference and make sure that it was below 1.7. But again, just like for ionic compounds, for the purposes of naming, we're going to use our covalent compound naming whenever we have two nonmetals that are bonded together, and that's when we're going to use it. So when we have something like CO2, which we know is carbon dioxide, since we have a nonmetal, this is the naming system we're going to use. This naming system is flexible, although it's still pretty simple, but we have to have a more flexible naming system here because nonmetals can form double and triple bonds when they're covalently compounded. And what that means is that molecules can combine in different ratios that we might not otherwise be able to predict. So for example, carbon and oxygen can form carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide. The properties and formation of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide are different, and so we have to have a naming system that will allow us to specify the difference between the two things. So what we're going to do here, step number one, is we're going to put the name of the element with the lower electronegativity first. When we write out the molecule, this is always going to be the first one. So we're just going to put whatever of these two atoms comes first. For the first element only, if there's one, we include no prefix. If there's more than one, then we add a prefix to indicate the number. So for example, here we would call this carbon monoxide. We wouldn't call it monocarbon because it's the first one. We don't include the mono if there's only one. However, if there's 2, 3, 4, whatever else there might be, we then do have to include it. For the other elements in the compound, we always indicate the number of them with the prefix, regardless of whether or not it's one. And then finally, for the last element, we change the end of the name to IDE. So, the example I've been saying here a couple times, carbon. Because it's one and it's the first atom, we don't have to say monocarbon, we just say carbon dioxide. Here's our chart telling us which prefix means which, indicating the two oxygens in carbon dioxide. Alternatively here, N2O4, so that's going to be nitrogen and oxygen. Because it's not a one-up on the first one, we have to include it, so we would call this dinitrogen. Oops, that should be in lowercase. Dinitrogen. Tetra for the 4. See, it's 4, so I go over here. 4. Tetra. Oops. Tetra oxide. Oops. Well, lots of mistakes in that one. Let's try that all again. So 2 on the nitrogen, so dinitrogen. Tetra oxide. That's better. Okay, NO2. See, here's the thing. Look at the ratios here. 2 to 4, 1 to 2. Those are in the same ratio, but they're not the same compound. In fact, those molecules would have slightly different properties. So NO2 would behave in one way and N2O4 would behave in the other way. So we need to make sure when we're naming both of those things that it's clear which one's which. NO2, so that would be nitrogen. Since it's a 1 on the first atom, we do not include the prefix mono, we just leave it alone. Oxide, 2 of them, so dioxide. And finally, SO3, so that's going to be sulfur. 3 oxygens, so trioxide. So that's the naming system here. Alternatively, if we want to take those names and change them into compounds, Carbon with no prefix coming out front means carbon 1. Monoxide, so CO. Carbon tetrafluoride, so again C. Tetrafluoride, so that's 4 fluorines. And finally, dihydrogen monoxide. When we write this one out, we're going to see H2 from the di, monoxide meaning 1 oxygen. And what we can see here is we have a funny name for water, which of course we never call it dihydrogen monoxide. We always call it water. For water and a few compounds like that, their common name is so well understood that we don't ever use the formal name for them. So that's it for naming covalent compounds. There's no real trick here. You can add more atoms, whatever it is. As long as you're using that prefix system, the mono, di, tri that we saw earlier, you will be able to specify the number of elements in each, or the number of each element, and you get it directly. Again, if the first atom has 1, you don't bother with the mono in the very first element. But if it's anything else like di, tri, you do have to include it. So that's naming covalent compounds.